Daniel had perfected the art of being invisible. At 28, he'd mastered the technique of walking through crowds without making eye contact, of sitting in coffee shops with his laptop angled just right to discourage conversation, of existing in the margins of other people's stories. His graphic design work allowed him to stay comfortably behind screens, communicating through emails and revision notes rather than actual human interaction. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he worked from Café Riviera, a bustling spot near the University District. That's where he first saw her, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but gradually, like the way you notice the same song playing on the radio until suddenly you're humming it without thinking. Her name was Elena, though he wouldn't learn that for weeks. She arrived around 2 in the afternoon, always with the same leather messenger bag, always ordering an Americano with a splash of cream. She had this way of moving through space that Daniel couldn't quite explain, purposeful but unhurried, like someone who knew exactly where she belonged in the world. Her dark hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the cafe windows, and when she laughed with the baristas, the sound seemed to make the whole room brighter. Daniel watched her the way one might watch a beautiful film, appreciating from a safe distance, never imagining he could be part of that narrative. She was a teaching assistant in the philosophy department, he'd overheard once, brilliant and passionate about her work. She inhabited a world of animated discussions and confident gestures, while he existed in quiet corners with his noise-canceling headphones. Sometimes their eyes would accidentally meet across the cafe, and Daniel would immediately look away, heat rushing to his face, certain that his staring had been obvious and unwelcome. She probably thought he was weird, he told himself. People like her didn't notice people like him, and that was fine. That was the natural order of things. One Thursday in late September, Daniel was deep into a project, wrestling with a logo design that refused to cooperate. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, his shoulders ached from hunching over his laptop, and his frustration was building with each failed iteration. He barely noticed when Elena packed up her things at her usual table by the window. He didn't notice her walking past him. He definitely didn't notice when his laptop power cord, stretched across the narrow aisle, caught her foot. The crash seemed to happen in slow motion, her bag flying forward, papers scattering like autumn leaves, her coffee cup bouncing once before spilling across the wooden floor. Daniel's heart stopped. In his rush to help, he knocked over his own cold coffee, adding to the chaos. His hands shook as he scrambled to gather the papers now soaked in a mixture of their spilled drinks. I'm so sorry," he stammered, not even looking up, wishing he could dissolve into the coffee-stained floor. Then he heard her laugh. Not the polite, forced laugh of someone trying to smooth over an awkward moment, but a genuine, warm sound that made Daniel finally raise his eyes. Elena was kneeling beside him, her expression more amused than angry, pushing wet hair back from her face where coffee had splashed. "Well," she said, her eyes, impossibly green, he noticed for the first time, sparkling with humor, "that's one way to meet someone." Daniel's mouth opened but no sound came out. Up close, she was even more beautiful, but that wasn't what struck him silent. It was the way she was looking at him, really looking at him, seeing him, like he was an actual person worthy of her attention rather than an obstacle to navigate around. Your papers. I ruined." He gestured helplessly at the soggy mess in his hands. "They're just student essays on Nietzsche," she said, waving it off. "Honestly, coffee stains might improve some of them." She smiled then, and it wasn't the polite smile you give strangers. It was warm and conspiratorial, like they were sharing a private joke. "I'm Elena." "Daniel." His voice came out rough, unused to this kind of interaction. The barista arrived with towels and apologies, and soon they were both on their feet, helping clean up the disaster zone. Daniel kept stealing glances at her, certain that at any moment she'd realize he wasn't worth this kindness, that she'd make an excuse and leave. But she stayed, chatting easily as they wiped down table legs and picked up the last scattered papers. "You're here a lot," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I've seen you. You always sit in that corner booth, working on designs?" She nodded toward his laptop, displaying his failed logo attempts. She'd noticed him. The invisible man had been seen. "Yeah, I'm a graphic designer. Freelance. He paused. I've seen you too. You're always reading philosophy books that look impossible. She laughed again, that sound that was quickly becoming his favorite. Guilty. Though right now I'm drowning in grading papers and wondering why I chose academia. She glanced at his screen. That's beautiful work, by the way. The color scheme is really sophisticated. Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. He'd received plenty of professional compliments before, but somehow this felt different. Personal. Real. Listen, Elena said, hoisting her now half-empty bag onto her shoulder, should let you get back to work. But... She hesitated, biting her lower lip in a way that made Daniel's pulse quicken. This might sound forward, but would you want to grab an actual coffee sometime? One that doesn't end up on the floor? The cafe seemed to fall away. The ambient noise, the other patrons, the golden afternoon light, everything faded except Elena, standing there with an uncertain smile, waiting for his answer. Yes, Daniel managed. Yes, I'd really like that. Daniel changed his shirt 3 times before their coffee date, each choice seeming simultaneously too casual and too formal. He finally settled on a simple navy button-down, then spent 10 minutes convincing himself not to cancel via text. The voice in his head kept insisting this was a mistake, that someone like Elena would realize within 5 minutes that he was boring, awkward, not worth her time. But when he arrived at the small bookshop cafe Elena had suggested, different from their usual spot, she was already there, waving him over with such genuine enthusiasm that some of his anxiety melted away. She wore a deep red sweater that made her dark hair look even richer, and she'd saved him the comfortable armchair across from hers. I ordered you a cappuccino, she said as he sat down. I hope that's okay. I noticed that's what you usually get. She'd noticed. Again. The invisible man was becoming visible, one detail at a time. The conversation started tentatively, work, the neighborhood, safe topics, but Elena had a gift for asking questions that went deeper than surface pleasantries. She wanted to know why he'd chosen graphic design, what he loved about it, what frustrated him. And more surprising than her interest was Daniel's own response, words flowing more easily than they had in years, stories he didn't usually share tumbling out. I think I became a designer because I'm better at communicating visually than verbally, he admitted. Images made sense when words didn't. But you communicate beautifully with words, Elena said, leaning forward. You're just more thoughtful than most people. You actually listen before responding. Their coffee date stretched into 3 hours. The bookshop staff began stacking chairs around them before Elena noticed the time. Oh God, Daniel, I've been talking your ear off. You must be. No, he interrupted, surprising himself with his firmness. This is the best afternoon I've had in years. Elena's smile could have lit the darkening street outside. Walk me home? They strolled through the autumn evening, their shoulders occasionally brushing, each accidental touch sending electricity through Daniel's nervous system. Elena lived in a converted warehouse building with exposed brick and huge windows. At her doorstep, she turned to him, keys dangling from her fingers. I had a wonderful time, she said softly. Me too. Daniel's heart hammered. Should he kiss her? Was that too presumptuous? Did she want? Elena solved the dilemma by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his cheek, lingering just long enough for him to catch the scent of her perfume, something like jasmine and vanilla. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. Same time next week? She asked. Or sooner, Daniel heard himself say. Her smile widened. Tomorrow, then. Dinner? Tomorrow, he confirmed, feeling like he might float away. Tomorrow became a series of tomorrows. Daniel discovered that Elena was a voracious reader who dog-eared pages and wrote passionate arguments in the margins. That she sang off-key while cooking and wasn't embarrassed about it. That she had a scar on her left shoulder from a childhood tree-climbing accident and still climbed trees in the park when she thought no one was watching. Elena learned that Daniel had a dry sense of humor that emerged once he felt comfortable. That he noticed tiny details, the way light hit surfaces, the precise shade of someone's mood. That he'd been lonely for so long he'd forgotten what connection felt like until she reminded him. Their fourth date was at Elena's apartment. She'd insisted on cooking, nothing fancy, just pasta, but when Daniel arrived with wine and flowers, the small space was transformed with candles and soft jazz playing from her speaker. Elena answered the door in jeans and a soft gray sweater, hair twisted up with a pencil stuck through it, more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. "Come in," she said, pulling him inside. Warning, I may have been overly ambitious with the recipe. The kitchen was indeed chaotic, with pots bubbling and herbs scattered across the counter. Daniel set down the wine and automatically started helping, chopping garlic, stirring sauce, moving through the small space with Elena in a dance that felt surprisingly natural. Their hands kept touching as they worked, each brush of skin deliberate now, charged with growing tension. "You're good at this," Elena observed, watching him dice tomatoes with practiced precision. "My mom taught me. She said if I was going to live alone, I needed to at least not starve." He paused. "She died 5 years ago. Cancer." Elena's hand covered his on the cutting board. "I'm sorry." "She would have liked you," Daniel said softly. "She always worried I'd end up alone because I was too scared to let anyone in." "And are you? Scared?" Daniel set down the knife and turned to face her fully. The kitchen was warm from the stove, Elena's face soft in the candlelight, and suddenly the space between them felt both infinitely far and impossibly close. Terrified, he admitted. But more scared of not trying. Elena's hand moved from his to cup his face, her thumb brushing his cheekbone. "Good. Because I'm falling for you, Daniel, and it would be really inconvenient if you didn't feel the same way." He kissed her then, finally, properly. Her lips were soft and she tasted like the wine they'd been cooking with. The kiss deepened, grew urgent, months of longing and careful restraint dissolving. Elena's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and Daniel wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the pasta water was boiling over on the stove. "Dinner can wait," Elena whispered against his mouth, and there was a question in her eyes, vulnerable despite her boldness. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked, even as his hands tightened on her hips. "I've been sure since you scrambled to pick up my papers," she said, smiling. "I've been sure since I watched you work for weeks, so focused and gentle with everything you touched." "I want you, Daniel." Elena led him to her bedroom, a cozy space with plants crowding the windowsills and books stacked on every surface. She lit a candle on the nightstand with slightly shaking hands, and Daniel loved her even more for being nervous too. They undressed each other slowly, reverently. Daniel traced the scar on Elena's shoulder with his lips, kissing the old wound like it was precious. Elena explored the planes of his chest, the muscles in his arms from years of rock climbing he'd mentioned once. They took their time, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they'd given to learning each other's minds. When they finally came together, skin against skin, it felt like coming home. Daniel had been with other women before, but this was different. This was Elena, who'd seen him when he was invisible, who'd smiled at him like he mattered, who'd coaxed him out of his shell with patience and warmth. "Look at me," Elena whispered, her fingers tilting his face up when he tried to hide in the curve of her neck. "I want to see you." So Daniel opened his eyes and let himself be seen, fully, completely, without defenses. And what he saw reflected in Elena's gaze was everything he'd never dared hope for: desire, yes, but also tenderness, recognition, belonging. Their bodies found a rhythm that was both urgent and unhurried, punctuated by gasps and whispered names and the sort of intimate laughter that comes from joy rather than humor. When they finally crested together, clinging to each other in the candlelight, Daniel felt something fundamental shift inside him. The walls he'd built around himself, the careful invisibility he'd cultivated, all of it crumbled, and he wasn't afraid. Afterward, they lay tangled in Elena's sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I didn't expect this," Daniel said quietly. "Any of this. Life's funny that way." Elena's voice was drowsy, content. "You spend so long looking for something, and then it literally trips over your laptop cord." I used to think being invisible was safer, he continued. If people didn't see you, they couldn't hurt you. Elena propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him seriously. But they also can't love you. And Daniel, she pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart, you deserve to be loved. You deserve to be seen. I'm still scared, he admitted. What if I'm not enough? What if? Hey. She stopped him with a finger on his lips. We're both figuring this out. I'm scared too. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. Daniel pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his. Outside, the city hummed with life, millions of people passing each other, mostly invisible to one another, rarely truly connecting. But here, in this small room lit by a single candle, two people had seen each other. Really seen. Elena, he murmured into her hair. Thank you for smiling at me. She laughed softly, that sound he'd fallen in love with weeks ago in a coffee shop. Thank you for being worth smiling at. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two formerly invisible people who'd found each other in a crowded world. And when morning came, when Daniel woke to find Elena still there, her face soft in the early light, he realized something profound: he wasn't invisible anymore. He'd been seen, been chosen, been loved. And that changed everything. The power of one genuine smile, he thought, watching Elena sleep. It had changed his life forever.